Hashtag the man who stopped World War III. September 26, 1983. 11:40 p.m. Moscow. A Soviet officer sits alone in a bunker 300 feet below the Kremlin. His name is Stanislav Petrov. He's 36 years old. And in the next 6 minutes, he will decide whether 300 million people live or die. The computer terminal in front of him screams red. 5 American nuclear missiles are incoming. 5. The alarm is deafening. His colleagues are panicking around him. Protocol is clear. Protocol demands he immediately notify his commander. Protocol demands the Soviet Union launch everything they have before those missiles arrive. But something in Petrov's gut tells him the computer is lying. Here's what nobody tells you about nuclear war: it almost happened. Not in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis when Kennedy and Khrushchev stared each other down. Not during some Hollywood climax. It almost happened on an ordinary Tuesday night because of a single piece of faulty machinery and one man's refusal to trust it. The 1980s were different from the 1960s. By 1983, both superpowers had stockpiled enough nuclear weapons to destroy human civilization 14 times over. The Americans had Ronald Reagan in the White House. A former actor. A fierce anti-communist who believed a nuclear war was winnable. Just weeks before September 26, he'd authorized new nuclear missiles in Western Europe. The Soviets were terrified. The Kremlin believed this was the beginning. This was America getting ready to strike. Petrov was born in Vladivostok, a port city on the edge of nowhere. His father was a colonel. The military was the only future he'd ever known. By his 30s, he'd become an expert in early warning systems. Computer systems. The machines that told the Soviet Union if the West was coming to kill them. He worked at Serpukhov-15, a facility so secret that most Russians didn't know it existed. But here's what made Petrov different from other officers: he questioned things. His colleagues didn't question. They followed orders. They trusted the machines. Petrov trusted his mind more than metal and circuits. On that September night, Petrov was working the graveyard shift. The bunker was called the command center. It monitored American missiles stationed across Europe. If a launch was detected, Petrov would have anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes before those weapons reached Moscow. Enough time. Barely. To trigger Soviet retaliation. The system was called OKO. It meant an American spy satellite would detect the flash of a rocket launch. The data would pulse into Moscow. Into this bunker. Into Petrov's screen. At 11:40 p.m., the alarm started screaming. His lieutenant leaned over his shoulder. Missile launch detected. Petrov stared at the data. 1 American missile. The screen showed its trajectory. Its target. Moscow. Then the display changed. Missile 2. Missile 3. Missile 4. Then 5. 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles. Each one carrying power equivalent to 750 Hiroshimas. Each one aimed at Soviet territory. American missiles meant for Russian cities. This was the attack they'd been training for. This was the nightmare scenario that kept generals awake at night. But Petrov noticed something strange. The missiles appeared on the screen in sequence. Not simultaneously. Real American launches, military experts knew, would be simultaneous. Random variation. Decoys. The Americans would never make an attack so predictable that a computer could catalog them one by one like items on a shopping list. Petrov's colonel, the man above him in the chain of command, didn't see this. The colonel saw missiles. The colonel saw the United States launching weapons at his country. Protocol demanded he call the general. The general would call the minister. The minister would call Yuri Andropov, the leader of the Soviet Union. And Andropov would authorize retaliation. All because of the machine in front of them. Petrov opened his mouth. But he didn't press the button. He didn't send the message up the chain. He sat very still and said words that seemed impossible. "I think it's a false alarm." His commander exploded. This wasn't a guessing game. This was nuclear war. But Petrov pushed back with the one thing he had: expertise. He explained the pattern. The sequence. The randomness that wasn't random enough. He told his colonel, "The system has no history of false alarms. But I have a feeling." A feeling. That was all he had. Those words would either save 300 million lives or destroy them. Because his colonel had to make a choice. Trust the machine or trust his subordinate's gut. Follow protocol or break it. And if he broke protocol and Petrov was wrong, he would be shot. Not metaphorically. Actually shot. For treason. The minutes started disappearing. Petrov's palms were sweating. The alarm was still screaming. His colleagues were still panicking. Phones were ringing. Seconds were ticking past. The machines said attack. The numbers said death. The protocols said retaliate. But Petrov's mind said no. His colonel stood next to him, frozen. 15 minutes had passed. 16. 17. The missiles should have been visible on radar now. They should have been minutes away from impact. But there was nothing. Just silence. The sky over Moscow was empty. 18 minutes passed. That's when everyone in the bunker understood what had happened. The system had malfunctioned. The computer had generated phantom missiles that didn't exist. An error in the machinery. A glitch that almost triggered nuclear annihilation. Later, technicians found the problem. A satellite sensor had reflected sunlight off clouds and mistaken it for the thermal signature of a rocket launch. A trick of light. A combination of bad timing and worse luck. The computer had interpreted this error and amplified it. Created 5 missiles from one false signal. 1. Single. Glitch. That's all stood between the world and atomic fire. But here's the part they buried. When Petrov's superiors reported the incident upward, nobody wanted to take responsibility. Nobody wanted to admit that Soviet nuclear defenses could be fooled by clouds. So the story got smaller. Quieter. It moved down the chain of command until it disappeared entirely. Petrov was quietly transferred. He kept working in the military. Nobody celebrated him. Nobody gave him a medal. The West didn't even know his name. For almost 9 years, the whole thing stayed classified. Petrov went back to regular life. He became a pensioner. He lived in an apartment. He grew vegetables on a small plot of land. He was poor. Forgotten. Some neighbors didn't even know what he did during the Cold War. To the world, he was just an old man who was kind to his grandchildren. In 1992, the story started leaking out through declassified Soviet documents. Journalists found Petrov. They wanted to interview him. They wanted to make him a hero. But Petrov did something strange. He downplayed what he'd done. He said he wasn't a hero. He said he just did his job. He said a lot of people would have done the same thing. That wasn't true. Petrov knew it wasn't true. Most officers would have followed protocol. Most would have sent that message up the chain. Most would have trusted the system over their instincts. But Petrov trusted his mind more than machines. He trusted doubt more than certainty. And that doubt saved the world. He died in May 2019 at the age of 77. His funeral was small. He was buried in a cemetery outside Moscow. Some Western media outlets wrote obituaries. CNN called him the man who prevented World War III. But in Russia, the country he saved, he remained largely unknown. The government that once would have shot him for doubting the system never fully acknowledged what he'd done. There's something haunting about this story that lingers long after the facts fade. We live in a world increasingly governed by algorithms, by systems, by computers that make decisions faster than human minds can process. We trust them. We have to trust them. They control our finances, our communications, our infrastructure. We've built a civilization on the assumption that machines are more reliable than people. Stanislav Petrov reminds us of something dangerous we've forgotten: machines are built by people. They fail like people fail. And sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and catastrophe is a single human being willing to doubt the system, willing to risk everything on instinct and evidence and the quiet conviction that something isn't right. He trusted himself when the whole world was screaming at him to trust the machine. And the whole world lived because he did. If you want to hear more stories about the people history tried to erase, people who changed everything in moments of impossible pressure, subscribe to Erased from History. New stories every week.